McQuestion, for over 28 years talking about things that matter with people who care. Production of McQuestion is made possible in part by individual viewers, supporters of the Foundation for Responsible Television, the University of Texas at Dallas, creating the future.
Welcome. I'm Dennis McQuestion, and on this program, my co-host Jim Falk and I are going to interview Steve Moore, and we've also interviewed Ken Hirsch about these kind of topics about the economy in the wake of the pandemic that we're experiencing and what should be done for the future and sort of what the damages have been as well. So I think most of you who are watching this program now have seen my co-host Jim Falk. He's the CEO of the World Affairs Council of Dallas-Fort Worth. Jim, welcome back to the program.
Thank you. Always good to be here.
Yep. And for longtime viewers of the McQuestion program, over 30 years, you can see Steve Moore. And Steve, like Jim Falk and me, has gotten a little gray hair over the years as well. Steve, welcome back to the program.
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me.
You spend a lot of your time in front of a camera these days, Steve, but you and I go back a long way to when you were in the think tank business. You still are in the think tank business, obviously, with Heritage and with this Unleash the Prosperity that you're working on now and other things as well. Can you give us some thoughts about how you see energy, not just in Texas, but in the country and actually worldwide, the issues with Saudi and issues with the Russians and what you see in terms of energy?
There is no question that Saudi Arabia and the Russians have a plan, scheme, I should say, to try to put our oil and gas industry out of business, but I think it will fail. Now, I'm not in favor of tariffs or other kind of import fees, because ultimately, even though this hurts the oil and gas industry, and it does, it's causing great pain in Oklahoma and Texas and North Dakota and Pennsylvania and Ohio. For the people who use oil and gas, it's a good thing, right? Because it means the cost of energy is lower. So my bottom line is, I think that they're going to get through this. I think we're going to continue to have a vibrant oil and gas industry right now. But let's face it, Dennis, this is an industry that's really been hit by the exact coronavirus that is decimating our airline industry, our retail stores. This is the catastrophe that really has now hit the oil and gas industry.
Well, you mentioned the airlines, so let's talk about that. I did an op-ed piece recently for the Dallas Business Journal in which I talked about American Airlines and some of the other.
Oh, careful, because you're there in Dallas. You don't want to.
We're right here. We're right here, and we all love American. Yeah, and here's
Southwest.
Yeah, and Southwest too, of course. Yeah. So, but here's the issue. American and all these airlines spent the last few years taking all of their earnings, virtually 96% of their free cash flow, Steve, and buying their stocks back. Now, American has gotten over $5 billion as a grant out of the taxpayer's pocket, a couple of low interest loans of another $5 billion. And so that sort of gets all over me as a free market person, is that, you know, you spend all your money buying stock back, you don't have any cash, don't have any capital, and now you want a bailout.
Yeah, so I'm very much in favor of any grants to industries, and we've made this. That's been a problem with a lot of these industries. They're getting grants. I am in favor, and I work with Steve Forbes and Art Laffer, and we've all recommended loans to industries like the airlines and to small mom and pop shops that were successful companies 2 months ago and now are facing, you know, dire straits because of the shutdown of the economy. But you shouldn't give these companies grants, because then it's just free money and it's treated as such. So I have no problem with a low interest loan to industries that have been affected by the government, because remember, it was the government. This is a man-made crisis, right? It's not an act of nature. But I think that the money has to be paid back to taxpayers.
Your former employer, the Wall Street Journal, particularly the editorial page, had a couple of articles today from people you and I both know well. One you know very well, that's Dan Henninger's article about laissez-faire capitalism. I don't know if you saw that article today or not, but he says, let's get back to where the private sector can do what the private sector does, because it's going to do it better, it's going to do it more effectively. I think you would agree. The second article, though, was written by Peter Gettler and Robert Levy of the Cato Institute, and they're just talking about they're not going to take a loan, and they wish other people wouldn't, to keep the government out of it. So how do you, as at least someone who used to be sort of limited government, have you embraced more and more government, or do you see this as a possible problem going forward?
It's a huge problem. I mean, this is what's keeping me up at night. I'm glad it's keeping you up at night, Dennis, and hopefully you too, Jim. I mean, we're creating a dependency culture. Businesses are now dependent on government. Individuals, families, workers are dependent on government. Milton Friedman used to joke about taking helicopters and stuffing them with $100 bills and dropping them over cities. And lo and behold, that's exactly what we're doing right now. Now, look, there is need for short-term aid for people and businesses. There's no question about it. I mean, bam, we had the best economy ever, basically 2 months ago. And then all of a sudden we hit this brick wall of the coronavirus, but it's got to be temporary. It's got to be loans. It's got to be repaid. We got to get government the hell out of the way afterwards. And by the way, after this $2.2 trillion spending bill we passed, which keeps getting extended and expanded, there should be no more spending. We did the spending. I'm in favor of a payroll tax suspension for the rest of the year for every business and every worker in America, because it actually rewards people for working and rewards businesses for getting up and hiring people. But you're right. I am disgusted by what's happening in Washington. Pelosi wants $2 trillion more. Donald Trump says he wants a $2 trillion infrastructure bill on top. We could have a $5 trillion deficit easily this year. Never thought I would see the day. So yes, I agree entirely with my old friends at the Cato Institute. We got to get the government out of the way as quickly as possible. That means we've got to get this American economy around the country up and running.
Steve, let me ask you a question. Go back to energy for a second. There's been so much pressure put on fossil fuels and companies, especially even the majors, in the last few years. Now, do you think that with the virus, we're going to see sort of a move away from renewables because the price is so low, or will it be the opposite?
That's a great question. And the left, there's always a reason to turn to green energy. So they've been saying, oh, look at all the problems the oil and gas industry has. Now we should move to green energy. Are you crazy? The problems they're having is that it's practically free. Why would we turn away from a free energy source and use an energy source that is 10 times more expensive? I mean, it's idiotic to be, there's no future for green energy when you have cheap oil, cheap gas, cheap coal, right? So we should, as a society, be using more oil and gas, not less. I mean, but you're right. This is the argument that many on the left are saying, because oil and gas is so cheap, they say we should move to wind power and solar power, which is so expensive, and that's a non sequitur.
And so a follow-up on that is, you've just written this article that I thought was so interesting about this degrowth movement, and you're seeing that really escalate on college campuses, even though they're closed right now.
Maybe, thank goodness, right?
So tell us, I mean, how rampant is this degrowth movement, and really tell us who's behind it and what it means.
Well, as Dennis knows, and I think you may know this, Jim, my mentor and the guy who really taught me economics was the great Julian Simon, who taught us that there's never a shortage of resources. The most important resource on this planet is the human mind. It always, the new technology and the know-how and ingenuity of the human mind is what creates everything that we have. And so we need to be using our resources in a way. Look, there's no country in the world that has more resources than we do. And so we ought to be using them at this time. And we have to move to, I've never been so nervous about the future of our country as I am right now. My parents used to talk about the Great Depression and then World War II and Vietnam. Of course, I lived through Vietnam War and 9/11. But right now, I am very frightened about where our country, I don't know about you, Jim, but I find what's happening with the expansion of, we just talked about $5-6 trillion of additional government spending and debt. And then the freedoms that are being abridged. Remember Easter Sunday, when many states shut down Easter services, which to me seems to be a violation of the First Amendment. I don't know about you guys, but you're seeing curfews in towns, martial law, surveillance. I think that's Orwellian. And by the way, it's interesting. Did you see that the #9 book on the New York Times bestseller list is 1984?
Yeah, but let me push back a little bit on that because, when someone is attending a church service on Easter Sunday, in effect, they're putting people at risk, not Sunday, but now for the next week.